Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm your host, Kerry Simmons, and welcome to Everyday Eerie, the podcast where the ordinary meets the extraordinary. Dive into the world of ghost stories, haunted objects, eerie places, and unsolved mysteries that will send shivers down your spine. Each week, we explore the tales that blur the line between the living and the dead, the known and the unknown. So turn down the lights, settle in, and prepare to be spooked. So on today's episode, we will be talking about a few strange and eerie coincidences, beginning with the story of the Erdington murders. Now, this story is about two women whose deaths are eerily similar, and it takes place in Birmingham, England, which is situated about halfway between Chester and London, and was often used as a designated halfway point by travelers in the 18th and the 19th centuries. Now, why are two murders with some similarities so odd? Because they happened 157 years apart from one another. On May 27th, 1817, the body of a 20-year-old woman named Mary Ashford was found in a water pit by a man named George Jackson, who was on his way to work and saw a bundle of clothes, a hat, and shoes floating in the water. He obviously thought that this was strange, and upon his calling of the police, they searched the body of water until they were able to uncover Mary's body, which had bruises on it, on her arms, and she appeared to have been sexually assaulted or involved in some kind of sexual act. Now, the day prior, May 26, which was Whit Monday, Mary was said to have left her home in Langley Heath by foot for work in Birmingham when she stopped at a friend Hannah Cox's house. She did this to drop off some clothes that she planned on wearing to a local party that they were going to later that evening. Now, Whit Monday is a Christian holiday, for those that don't know, that takes place after the Pentecost and basically celebrates the day that Jesus descended upon his apostles. So it's a specific day in time. Now, around 6 p.m. that evening, Mary had returned to Hannah's house where both girls got ready, as they planned on doing, and they were to attend a dance. So they made their way to the Tyburn house where the dance was to be held. All seemed normal. Both girls had a great time. They met two young men, one by the name of Benjamin Carter, who was primarily dancing with Hannah, and another by the name of Abraham Thornton, who hit it off with Mary. Now, at some point around midnight, Hannah, Benjamin, Mary, and Abraham left the party via the main road, Chester Road, with Hannah and Benjamin heading back towards Hannah's home and Mary and Abraham heading towards Mary's grandfather's home. Now, Mary was gone at this point for several hours until about 4 a.m. when she finally returned to Hannah's house to change back into her work clothes. Now, as friends usually do, the two girls began to gossip about what had gone on that evening, and when asked, Mary said that her and Abraham had a nice time and she seemed to be in an overall happy mood, nothing out of the ordinary. Based on witness accounts, Mary was seen walking that same main road shortly after this time, but this would be the last time anyone would see her alive, as it was no more than just a few hours later when George Jackson, that we mentioned earlier, found her in the water pit. By about 8 a.m., Abraham was arrested for the murder of Mary Ashford, though he was extremely confused, stating that they had been intimate the night before, and he walked her halfway back to Hannah's, though when she was out of sight, he left. He turned around and went home. Now, the public, including Mary's brother, truly believed that Abraham to be guilty by the time his trial began on August 8th. However, 3 different witnesses were able to confirm Abraham's alibi, and since they really didn't have any concrete evidence to convict him, a non-guilty verdict was given. Mary's brother appealed this verdict, but this appeal was eventually thrown out. Still, the people in town were so convinced that Abraham was guilty, they chastised him with newspaper articles and poems even about his guilt, to the point where he felt the need to leave town, heading all the way to America to escape this outrage. Once the autopsy results were in, they deemed Mary's cause of death as drowning. Now, this murder otherwise went unsolved and became nothing more than a sad, sad story with a likelihood of a love affair gone wrong, until 157 years later, on May 27th of 1974. Barbara Forrest was a nurse who worked for Pipe Hayes Children's Home, was known as the Pipe Hayes Children's Home at the time, who was also seen for the last time on Whit Monday after a night of dancing and drinks with her boyfriend, Simon Belcher. When her body was discovered, there were signs of strangulation as well as sexual assault. And of course, her boyfriend Simon was questioned, but he stated that he had walked Barbara to the bus stop at around 1 a.m., and this was the last time he saw her. 100 detectives and a short duration of time later, the police suspected a man named Michael Ian Thornton, who lived on Chester Road and knew Barbara from work. There were blood stains that were found on Thornton's pants, and his alibi was found to have been made up by his mother. So he was arrested and also put on trial. But now, similar to Mary Ashford's case, the alleged guilty party was found not guilty due to a lack of evidence. Similar still was that Barbara's sibling, like Mary's, appealed this verdict, and the verdict was thrown out. Now, another detail that struck everyone as being strangely similar was that Mary Ashford had supposedly told Hannah Cox's mother that she had, quote, a bad feeling about the week to come. And Barbara Forrest reportedly had told a co-worker about 10 days before her murder, quote, this is going to be my unlucky month, I just know it, don't ask me why. So to summarize, Mary and Barbara were both 20 years old when they passed. They were both last seen alive walking Chester Road. They both shared a birthday. Both men initially convicted of their murder shared the last name Thornton. Both had a sibling try to appeal the non-guilty verdict. They were both out dancing before they passed. And I'm not going to lie, actually, I see a slight resemblance almost between the two girls when looking at their photos. So be sure to check out my Instagram page to see those two pictures and see what you think for yourselves. Now, Pipe Hayes Hall, the children's home where Barbara worked, is reportedly haunted, with multiple accounts of people seeing a woman in an old-fashioned yellow dress walking across the bowling green. She often turns to glance at those passing by and then vanishes without a trace. So it is unknown, though, whether or not this is one of the ghosts of either Mary or Barbara, but there has been some speculation that it could be due to the location on the same road in which they were both murdered. Pipe Hayes Hall now goes by the name Castle Bromwich Hall, as it was purchased by a developer and turned actually into a 4-star hotel. So if anyone is ever in the area visiting, you can explore the locations where Mary and Barbara spent their last moments and maybe even learn a new ghost story or two during your stay at Castle Bromwich. Now, our next story makes us think a little bit more about nature versus nurture. So what is ingrained in us as part of our DNA and what is learned from our environment? Nature certainly seems to win in the case of the Jim twins, two twins separated at birth who went on to lead nearly identical lives. The twins were first placed for adoption in 1940 when they were just about 3 weeks old. Both were named James by their adoptive parents, who had absolutely no communication with each other, one being James Arthur Springer and the other James Edward Lewis. They would later find out that they both decided to go by the name Jim when they finally reconnected after about 39 years apart on February 9th of 1979. When they got to talking about their respective lives to learn a little bit more about one another, they learned that their lives were eerily similar. Both men had a childhood dog named Toy, and each had an adoptive brother named Larry. Each of them had been married twice, with both of their first wives named Linda, and both of their second wives were named Betty. They both named their first sons James Allen, and shared similar interests in school, both noting a love for math and a dislike for spelling. They also both dabbled in mechanical drawing and carpentry and had worked part-time as deputy sheriffs in their respective Ohio towns, which were about 70 miles apart from one another. They would both vacation along the same beach in St. Petersburg, Florida, and both drove the same Chevy car, and they were both also heavy smokers. Now, a New York Times article that was published on December 9th of 1979 quoted the twins as saying, "This is really blowing our minds. Just unbelievable. It's weird, downright spooky. We even use the same slang. A lot of times I'll start to say something and he will finish it," Lewis said. Now, because of these crazy coincidences, the twins actually took part in a study conducted by researcher Dr. Thomas Bouchard of the University of Minnesota. He said, quote, "The probability of two people independently having the same name is not that rare, but when you sort of start to compound the coincidences, they become highly unlikely very quickly. In fact, I'm flabbergasted by some of the similarities." So the twins were sort of described at this point as being like a living laboratory, as even though the studies of twins and their relationships to one another had been going on for some time prior to this, it was more rare that the opportunity to study identical twins separated at birth would arise. Now, throughout this study, it was found that their brain waves and personality testing were nearly identical to one another. They also studied these specific types of migraines known as mixed headache syndrome that both men would experience, finding that they both began experiencing them at the age of 18. They would experience them in equal numbers and for equal amounts of time and at equal intensities. They both even described the pain of these headaches in the same way, and these questions were being asked to each twin separately, mind you, which made them conclude that dealing with stress may actually be more ingrained in us biologically than we had originally thought, that the code that each person is given may make them more or less likely to respond in certain ways during certain situations. Now, interestingly enough, these types of migraines were not present in all of the other sets of twins studied, but when it was present in one, it was also present in the other. Some were even convinced that the Jim twins are proof of telepathy and the ability to communicate between minds, but both twins noted feeling a strange emptiness that they no longer felt after meeting one another, which is super, super strange. I think that we all know that twins have an uncanny ability to communicate with one another, but the interesting thing about this situation is they were even able to live nearly identical lives without even knowing each other for 39 years. Now, the next story is about a man named Henry Ziegland, who was born sometime in 1861 in Honey Grover, Texas, where he grew up on his family's farm. Now, when his parents passed, he naturally inherited the farm and continued to live there. He eventually met a woman named Charla Karras, who was initially living with Henry, though he ended up moving into her home in 1881 when he decided to give his farm over to his brother Jacob. Henry and Charla dated for about 5 years when he suddenly up and left her, leaving her completely heartbroken. She was so heartbroken that she ended up taking her own life, which obviously devastated her brother, James Karras, and left him extremely angry with Henry. Now, he knew that Henry had purchased his farm back from a third owner, as his brother had sold it to someone else, and he went to pay him a visit. Henry was outside in his barn tending to the horses when James snuck in, pulled out his pistol, and shot at Henry. The bullet had grazed Henry's cheek and ended up getting lodged into a tree behind the barn, but Henry fell to the ground in an effort to play more injured than he actually was. Now, seeing the blood along with Henry's collapse, James was pretty positive he had killed Henry, and his grief about the whole situation just got the better of him. He ended up turning the pistol on himself. Now, on June 5th of 1903, Henry decided that he wanted to remove this tree from his property for whatever reason, and he asked his brother Jacob for help with this. When the attempts that they made at chopping the thick tree down failed, they decided to blow it up with dynamite. So Henry tied 3 sticks of dynamite to the tree, and upon lighting them, the powerful explosion dislodged the bullet, which ricocheted into the side of Henry's head, killing him instantly. Now, this story gave me like a Final Destination vibe. Like, obviously, the death wasn't immediate, but it was almost like a you can't fight fate kind of situation. It's like the idea of fatalism, which kind of stresses the idea that actions and events are all tied to destiny, which leaves us with the resignation that these events are completely outside of our control. So that was an interesting one, or maybe a case of karma. We don't know much about Henry's life other than that he broke this girl's heart and the brother was angry, but we don't know what kind of person he actually was and in what context he broke Charlotte's heart. So could be a case of karma. But the next story, it's a short one, but I think it's sweet and it's pretty incredible. And it involved the author Anne Parrish, who was an American novelist and writer. She was born in Colorado Springs on November 12th of 1888, and she passed on September 5th of 1957. So one summer, Anne had been traveling to Paris with her husband, enjoying all of the tourist destinations and the cafes. But what Anne loved the most, being a novelist herself, was exploring the bookshops in town, picking up local reads, and just admiring the quaintness of some of them. Now, her husband was getting really tired of the day's constant stops at bookstores and decided to stop at a cafe. But as luck would have it, across the street was one more bookstore that Anne had decided to admire, and upon doing so, she was really excited to find a book called Jack Frost and Other Stories, an English book for children. Her husband was less than enthusiastic about it, but Anne explained that this book reminded her of her childhood, as it was commonly read to her in her youth. But she had not seen it nor thought about it for at least 20 years. So this was just bringing up a lot of old memories and emotions in her. And she began to talk about the stories in the book to see what she could remember about them while her husband inspected it, only to stop dead in his tracks, handing the book back to her, understanding that she had, in fact, known the book very well, as on the flyleaf on the inside of the book was a childlike signature that said Anne Parrish, 209 North Weber Street, Colorado Springs. So this is a story of her not finding the book, but the book once again finding her. And I just thought that that was a really, really sweet story and a really incredible one, because this book not only found its way back to her, but she was in a completely different country. So it kind of goes to show that objects, I feel like, have memory, and something that means so much to you and is special to you has a little bit of a connection with you. And there have been multiple stories like that where someone has lost something in a different area, and then years later they find it someplace completely different, or they come across someone who found it and returns it to them. So lots of stories like that, and I think that that's just a testament to how memories work and how our love for different things in our lives and different objects, how that can keep us connected to them for a long period of time. So that was a sweet one. But that concludes our episode today on eerie coincidences. So be sure to check out my Instagram page, and don't forget to send a personal ghost story to everydayeerie26@gmail.com. I would love to hear them. And thank you for joining me on this journey into the eerie and unexplained. I hope these stories captivated your imagination, and that you will join me next time for more tales of the strange and supernatural. Until then, keep an eye out for the eerie in your everyday.